Sigmund Freud's psychosexual theory. We begin with the often controversial figure, Sigmund Freud. Freud has been a very influential figure in the area of development. His view of development and psychopathology dominated the field of psychiatry until the growth of behaviorism in the 1950s. His assumptions that personality forms during the first few years of life and that the ways in which parents or other caregivers interact with children have a long-lasting impact on children's emotional states, have guided parents, educators, clinicians, and policymakers for many years. We have only recently begun to recognize that early childhood experiences do not always result in certain personality traits or emotional states. There is a growing body of literature addressing resilience in children who come from harsh backgrounds and yet develop without damaging emotional scars. Freud has stimulated an enormous amount of research and generated many ideas. Agreeing with Freud's theory in its entirety is hardly necessary for appreciating the contribution he has made to the field of development. Freud's theory of self suggests that there are three parts of the self. The id is the part of the self that is inborn. It responds to biological urges without pause and is guided by the principle of pleasure. If it feels good, it is the thing to do. A newborn is all id. The newborn cries when hungry, defecates when the urge strikes. The ego develops through interactions with others and is guided by logic, or the reality principle. It has the ability to delay gratification. It knows that urges have to be managed. It mediates between the id and the superego, using logic and reality to calm the other parts of the self. The superego represents society's demands for its members. It is guided by a sense of guilt. Values, morals, and the conscience are all part of the superego. The personality is thought to develop in response to the child's ability to learn to manage biological urges. Parenting is important here. If the parent is either overly punitive or lax, the child may not progress to the next stage. Here's a brief introduction to Freud's stages. The oral stage lasts from birth until around age 2. The infant is all id. At this stage, all stimulation and comfort is focused on the mouth and is based on the reflex of sucking. Too much indulgence or too little stimulation may lead to fixation. The anal stage coincides with potty training, or learning to manage biological urges. The ego is beginning to develop in this stage. Anal fixation may result in a person who is compulsively clean and organized, or one who is sloppy and lacks self-control. The phallic stage occurs in early childhood and marks the development of the superego and a sense of masculinity or femininity as culture dictates. Latency occurs during middle childhood, when a child's urges quiet down and friendships become the focus. The ego and superego can be refined as the child learns how to cooperate and negotiate with others. The genital stage begins with puberty and continues through adulthood. Now the preoccupation is that of sex and reproduction. Strengths and weaknesses of Freud's theory. Freud's theory has been heavily criticized for several reasons. One is that it's very difficult to test scientifically. How can parenting in infancy be traced to personality in adulthood? Are there other variables that might better explain development? The theory is also considered to be sexist in suggesting that women who do not accept an inferior position in society are somehow psychologically flawed. Freud focuses on the darker side of human nature and suggests that much of what determines our actions is unknown to us. So, why do we study Freud? As mentioned previously, despite the criticisms, Freud's assumptions about the importance of early childhood experiences in shaping our psychological selves have found their way into child development, education, and parenting practices. Freud's theory has heuristic value in providing a framework from which to elaborate and modify subsequent theories of development. Many later theories, particularly behaviorism and humanism, were challenges to Freud's views. Main points to note about Freud's psychosexual theory. Freud believed that development in the early years has a lasting impact. There are three parts of the self: the id, the ego, and the superego. People go through 5 stages of psychosexual development: the oral stage, the anal stage, the phallic stage, latency, and the genital stage. We study Freud because his assumptions about the importance of early childhood experience provide a framework for later theories that both elaborated and challenged his work.